I hope you are having a great week. I am too, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation that you're going to hear today. We're talking about respecting the past while building for the future. Seems kind of a nebulous subject. I get it, but the conversation you're going to hear today is with Nick Cryer from Berkeley Place on balancing heritage and preservation with modern sustainable design innovations. And Nick is from the UK, and he's from Bath. And in the UK, they've got rules. After spending over 30 years in media, you develop a keen ear for the difference between a trend and a philosophy. My conversation with Nick Cryer from Berkeley Place was a masterclass in the latter. We sat down to explore the intricate dance of high-end residential restoration in a world where the weight of history meets the uncompromising demands of high-end modern architecture and design. What struck me most in my conversation with Nick was the inherent tension between time, cost, and quality. We all have issues. What is it? The fast, good, or cheap, pick two, right? That's ours here in the States. Well, in the UK, they have time, cost, and quality. Same thing. In our world of instantaneous communication and Amazon Prime expectations, the craftsmanship required to restore a listed Georgian property in a place like Bath simply cannot be rushed. And it can't be rushed in large part because you've got hurdles. You've got boards and panels and people that you have to get these decisions cleared through. Nick pointed out that while we can accelerate many things, we cannot accelerate the soul of a building. When you are dealing with historic England and the preservation of original fabric, you aren't just a builder, you're a steward of a narrative that started centuries before you arrived. We also dug into the material IQ of these structures. There is a common misconception that historical buildings are inherently inefficient. In reality, the thermal mass of a thick stone wall often outperforms the thin-skinned structures of today. The challenge lies in the surgical integration of 21st century life, sophisticated kitchen suites, seamless technology, and sustainable upgrades, like double glazing, without erasing the character that made the property valuable in the first place. And there's so many more examples, and you're going to hear a lot of them. Since the pandemic, the kitchen has evolved into a highly functioning hub that requires more infrastructure than original floor plans ever intended. Seeing how Berkeley Place navigates these installations, sometimes building rooms within rooms to protect original plasterwork, is a testament to the level of detail required at this level of the industry. It's a reminder that true high-end design isn't just about the finish. It's about the invisible infrastructure and respect for the hands that laid the first stones. Why is this conversation so important? Every major American city is grappling with a housing crisis versus historical restoration, respect for the historical roots of every city. You see it from Los Angeles to New York, from Texas to the Dakotas. You see it everywhere. Do we protect what was once there, or do we make way? Do we pave the way for a future with more sustainable housing? There's got to be balance, and I think you can look to the foundations and the historical preservation in the UK and look at historic England as a model. You may not like all of it, and perhaps there's some things that can be tweaked here and there, but they have a system. Whereas here in the States, we kind of don't. We don't have a national system for sure. And locally, it's kind of hit or miss. Anyway, you're going to hear a lot about that. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Nick Cryer from Berkeley Place. We're going to get to that right after this. At the highest level of design, the absolute best specifying designers, architects, landscape designers are all highly focused on the technology and performance of products and materials today. You have to, because the products you specify for your projects have to perform and they have to last. That's one of the reasons why I am so proud to be working with TimberTech. Their focus on the technical renaissance of synthetic decking is literally changing the conversation about innovation and performance. It pulls focus on three priorities homeowners have and expect from the products their designers and architects specify for their luxury projects. 1. Aesthetics must match the overall design and fit visually. 2. Durability and maintenance. I've told you about my board flipping stories from my own wood decks. Clients not only want beauty, but they want ease and ease of use, and they want it to last for decades. 3. Sustainably made. Clients are more conscious of the environment now, and they want the same of their materials. TimberTech hits each one of these elements with a product that not only meets expectations, they exceed them. TimberTech makes a synthetic decking that looks just like wood, color and embossed wood grain for a natural appearance. Their composite decking is technologically superior, as it has been created to last for decades, and it's manufactured with up to 85% recycled material. Their advanced PVC vintage and landmark collections have a Class A flame spread rating, making these products an amazing choice for wildfire-prone areas, which unfortunately continues to grow on the risk map. Check the show notes for more information about this and to find the nearest showroom or lumberyard where you can find TimberTech, or you can check them out directly, timbertech.com. I have a challenging relationship with technology. Do you find that similar since the pandemic? That everything is moving at such a rapid pace that it's hard to keep up?
Yeah, it's insanely hard to keep up. You think you've overcome enough of it to deal with, everyday life, and then someone shows you something else. You go, oh my God, have I got something else I've got to learn? Another language? I'm an Apple person. I understand Apple, and I can play the Apple game, like so my Apple Watch, Apple phone. So as long as it's in that Apple world, I probably can deal with it. I'm connected to that language. Things outside Apple, I struggle with a little bit.
Does that change the manner in which you work? Have you had to change due to everything coming out so quickly, specifically AI, but everything else, because it's happening so quickly that the timelines have been shrunk? How does that affect you and the manner in which you work and prepare for projects?
Well, I think about it a lot. There's a few things that have really changed massively. I've been in the industry for quite a long time. I started at the age of 16. So, dare I say it, I've been in the industry for over 40 years. And I started at the bottom, and I've been in consulting and contracting. I've been on the tools, and I've seen, so many different changes. But when I think back to when we used to write letters and had an in trade and out trade and that sort of thing, and Josh, you'll have been around then too. So it was acceptable to receive a letter and respond to it probably within 5-6 days, and get it in the post. And then there's all the post to blame and all this sort of stuff. But, you're probably the same. We get clients these days who will send an email and then send me a WhatsApp to check I've got the email. And I say to my clients, look, if, really important stuff where we need to capture the audit trail, we've got to communicate by email. But if you want pop over and pop into the property next Wednesday, or you're just checking if I'm around on Sunday for half an hour chat, then just WhatsApp me. That's the way the world is now. There's no off switch, I don't think. I don't find an off switch these days. If you've got your phone by your side, then you are connected to everything you're connected to.
And it's interesting too. I think you're right. And I don't think that there is no off switch because people don't want it. I think that there is such a fear of missing out and missing opportunity. And
Yeah,
because everyone is available and accessible all the time,
yeah,
that it just kind of went about the wayside. And I find that so fascinating because design and architecture, building, construction, specifically residential, but also with hospitality and commercial, we are a desire business. Ours is a desire industry, and never before can I have I in my life can I remember that old adage, the what, fast, cheap, and good, pick two, right?
yeah.
That old adage. But now it's the timelines and everything are speeding up, especially with AI. And I'm curious, how do you address that? And how do you, especially, and we're going to look at some of your projects, but especially with some of the projects that you work on, the restorations and the historically significant projects, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, you raise a valid point. We call it time, cost, quality. Those are the three dynamics that we're overseeing. Okay, and you can't have all three equal. Like if I get a client saying, and I do get this, sometimes we'll get a client say, look, I had one the other day, looking to buy something for 10 million pounds, big piece of real estate, and the bit they wanted to focus on, they needed to have ready in 6 months. So the question was, can this be done in 6 months? Can you get it done? We don't have the we just done. They said they've just done a massive renovation in another country. They just didn't have the appetite to do another massive renovation. So if this property could be done in 6 months, they'd buy it, or the work they wanted to have done. So you've got to go and meet them there and have the conversation about, well, look, I can do something for you in 6 months, but you're going to pay more for that, because you can't expect me to go out to all the different trade subcontractors and go through a completely competitive process. But that takes time. If you need to get moving, then you're going to rely on me going to what we consider to be tried and tested members of our supply chain. So you might satisfy yourself that you're getting a fair price, but you might not necessarily felt like you've been through a competitive process to get the best price. So unless you want to take longer. And then the quality bit, well, quality takes time, particularly in old period buildings, where often it's joinery that's been overpainted over hundreds of years. And if someone wants I get clients who say to me, I said, well, what sort of standard do you want? They say, well, like, one step down from new. And I say, okay, so I can do that, but that's a lot of preparation and rubbing down and taking joinery back. And, you can't have kind of two people working on one window. You have to have one person. So very early on in the process, Josh, I would introduce people to those dynamics and just really trying to get out from them what is the most important one. Because as with that couple, they suddenly bought into the fact that perhaps they shouldn't be putting that time pressure on, and maybe a little bit longer would be suitable. That wasn't about the finances; it was about the quality. But sharing those dynamics early on is, we find, very, very valuable, because a lot of people will just say, well, I don't care, I just want it all. Right. So you do need to explain to them a little bit. We'll try to. We try like mad, Josh, to be relatively selective about our clients. I mean this in the nicest way. I hope I'm not saying anything that sounds derogatory to anyone, but when you put your website together and you set out your stall and say, look, this is the sort of projects we like doing. This is what we're after. If you're those sort of people and you've got a project that looks like this, then come and talk to us. This is what we do. So we've talked to people and engaged in projects where, I'm going to just shut some numbers around. In London, we had a client who bought a flat in Number One Hyde Park, so probably the most expensive piece of real estate at the time you could buy. And they wanted an amazing kitchen built. And we were working with some kitchen designers. And the couple were celebrities, and I'm not going to mention their names, but the point is, I never saw them or never met them. We were dealing with an agent who was dealing with an agent, and quite frankly, they were being crazy, just demanding this and demanding that. So we've soon worked out that we don't want to work in that space. I want to work in the space where I'm talking to someone like you, Josh, who, really wants to engage in the enhancement of their property. And it doesn't matter how much wealth anyone's got. More, we find that it's more about how much they want to invest in that particular asset at that particular time. Everyone's got other priorities. So, we've dealt with some people with infinite wealth, and they'll still have a budget as well. Like, we might not live here for more than say 8 years because we're going to go there next, and the kids are moving on. So, I only want to allocate like £500,000 to this property. So, budget's always really, really important. So we set our stall out to say that we don't want to deal with people who are crazy. We want to deal with people who at least have one foot on the floor. They're still slightly in touch with reality, and more importantly, they're the ones that we're going to be engaging with. We don't really want to deal with an agent who's reporting back to them, and then words get twisted and we start getting into difficulty.
But it's interesting too. You bring up a really unique idea, and that is, most people who hire an interior designer, builder, contractor, architect, it's especially on a residential project, it's for their home. It's a family home. And you don't have an interlocutor. You don't have a third party, an agent, whatever, in between the two parties trying to, because I think especially in this case, it only makes things more difficult because you're not speaking the same language, and the agent in the middle can't possibly, like when you onboard a new client, to have that conversation with them. And it's not just about color palette and style and features. It's about how do you live? How do you live now? How do you want to live? If you're going to be here 8 years, what's the starting point, the end point? If you're going to be here potentially longer than that, is aging in place a big theme in your work?
When you say aging in place, longevity of the residents,
Yeah.
huge,
Yes.
huge, huge, because it's become so expensive for people to move these days. We're finding clients are saying, look, we're going to do this properly because it's unlikely we'll move again, or it's not something we want to do again. So let's get this right and do it properly. And so that means they're thinking about, well, how can we stay in this property as long as possible? So another thing that's becoming very expensive in the UK is living in a care home. You live in a care home, it's thousands of pounds per week. So people are starting to think, well, hold on, if I've got a property that could adapt for someone to come and live in that property, in one area of the property, perhaps in the lower ground floor or wherever, then they could be our housekeeper and our carer, and that would enable us to stay in this house for much longer, and that'd be a much more cost-effective way than one of us perhaps needing to go into care home and then the other one going into care home and all the paraphernalia and complications attached to that. So certainly people are thinking, it would be handy if this house would suit us in the long term. Clearly, younger people aren't thinking like that, but a lot of my clients who are spending significant sums of money our average client age is somewhere between the age of sort of mid-40s to mid-50s, and they're thinking about that.
Yeah, I think you have to, especially nowadays. But the other thing I was going to ask you about in that regard is what percentage of the projects that you work on are new build? If you're talking about something in the States and you go to Texas, 90% can be new build because there's just land to go out. But I was looking at your website, and one of the projects I want to talk to you about was built. I believe it was constructed in 1790. That just doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, how many of the projects that you work on are infill projects or ground up projects, so they're new construction, new build versus recreating, refurbishing, rehabbing, remodeling.
So we specialize in remodeling houses. So probably 85 to 90% of the work we do is involving period or listed properties. That's our area of specialism. Our supply chain is clued up to work on those sort of properties. A lot of sensitivities around working with listed heritage buildings. It's criminal offence in this country to remove historic fabric or change the character of a listed building without consent. So it's, you have to be really careful. So we specialise in that area. That doesn't mean to say we don't do some new builds as well. Most of the projects we do have a new build element, so there might be, an orangery extension, a brand new orangery extension, or something like that, built onto the back of or on the side of the property. But they all tend to involve an old property of some shape or form. Just going back to the point we were making about the longevity of property and people thinking about how they might continue to live in a property. The other thing, of course, is the cost for young people to purchase property in this country, the same as I'm sure in the US. But so people are also thinking, well, what if one of the kids wants to come home and live here? Or as the house was probably designed in the first instance for multiple generations to reside there.
You are listening to my conversation with Nick Cryer of Berkeley Place. We'll be right back. If you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you've heard me say this, that the most important word in the design industry is service. Product is important, price is important, selection is important, but stellar service is the premier idea that can make all the difference in the success of a project, any project. How design professionals like you demand great service and your favorite brands in one place with expert, knowledgeable, and non-commission sales professionals. It's really important. It means that their only incentive is your satisfaction. Pacific Sales, Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, has just that with over 60 years of experience in Southern California. Pacific Sales is your destination for exploration, advice, and inspiration. Now, you have the Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home team to help you and offer their Pro Rewards program, which is a trade program unlike any you have experienced before. Earn 3% in Best Buy gift cards, e-gift cards, or 2.5% in rewards checks for every qualified and delivered sale. In addition to special trade pricing, exclusive offers, access to exclusive special events, and so much more than I could possibly tell you about here. And the cherry on top is access to exclusive builder trade incentives from top brands and the stellar service, again, from a company that has been serving the industry for over 60 years. Terms and conditions apply to the Pro Rewards program and builder trade incentives. So visit a Pacific Sales expert at a showroom today for full details and to learn how you can unlock additional savings and benefits. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best of the best. Visit Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home today and elevate your projects to new heights. The design industry is in the midst of a generational and fundamental change. If you're in the biz, you feel it. I know you do. We all do. Just about every aspect of the industry is growing, changing, and turning into something entirely different due to a number of factors that, not to go into here, but between tariffs and supply chain and political influence, just clients have changed. Pricing has changed. Everything about the industry has changed, except for one thing: the need for strong design and architecture communities. And that's what led to the creation of Shelter Republic, an online community exclusively for the design and architecture communities, a place to engage with other like-minded creatives outside of the prying eyes of clients and the media. Wouldn't you like to belong to a nurturing community where you can have those real, challenging, authentic conversations, watch exclusive design-focused content, take free courses to level up your design business, hear from experts in the industry, guiding you and helping you move ever forward? And it's free to join. No catch, but it's invitation only. This is not like maybe some other programs you've heard of before where you pay a fee, a sizable fee, and go through a quasi-vetting process only to get there and realize that you're kind of just paying for an ad. That is not what this is. If you're a designer or an architect, you qualify. If you want in, email convobydesign@outlook.com and type Shelter Republic in the subject line. That's it. an invitation to join will follow. Call this the anti-social media platform where you can meet, engage, and share ideas in a safe, closed community environment of like-minded creatives. That's what this is. And like I said, it's free to join. Send an email, convobydesign@outlook.com. Subject line is Shelter Republic. It's that simple. And like I said, it's free to join. See you there. I think about it. I think about this a lot, especially leading up to our conversation. Because when you say listed properties, that when you say listed in the States, it means for sale. But for you, when you say listed, you mean on a registry. And I'm really interested in that because I think we're at a crossroads now between the advancement of technology and the desire to save historically relevant properties. And I think sometimes, and I want your take on this, I feel like sometimes they get confused with, because something's old, it must be saved. And you have, are your regulations, are they regional in nature? Are they nationalized? What's the nature of the regulations?
So there's a centralized statutory government body, okay, formerly called English Heritage, now called Historic England. So that is the government body, and that sets the agenda. They decide whether a property should be listed or not listed, and they give a listed category. So you can have grade 2 listed, which is the lowest level, grade 2 star, next level up, grade 1 star. So, grade 1 star is, Buckingham Palace, Churchill statue, absolutely protected by the nation, but it's a government body and it's centralized. So that centralized government body informs the regions, it informs the local county councils. So conservation officers who work for their local council, say if we're looking at a project in Bath, that in Bath there will be a council with a conservation team, and that conservation team will be informed by the government central body. And so they are setting the agenda and helping people understand what they can and cannot do to their property, or if they want to make some adaptations to it, how they might go about that whilst preserving the historic fabric. But I know in the US it's a decentralized system, and of course you've got far fewer listed buildings. I mean, I think there's something like 400,000 listed buildings in the UK. There's a phenomenal amount of listed property, whereas I don't know what it is in America, but I don't think it's anything like that. So there's a lot of properties, and people, the general public who buy one of these properties are probably poorly informed. They probably think, well, it's listed, so I can't do anything, or often we get people say, oh, the property's listed, but it's only the front door that's listed, so we can touch everything else. And so we often get brought on board very early in the purchase process, where people want to know, look, if I'm going to buy this property, which we've kind of fallen in love with, we need to understand what we can and can't do. We'd like to do this, we'd like to do that. How can you help us navigate through the conservation process, and how much it's going to cost, and how long it's going to take? So we can that's a good foot in the door for us very early in the purchase process.
It seems like an exceptional process, and I say that a few years ago I did an episode. I actually did 2 episodes on this one. It was a property in Beverly Hills, California. It was called 1001 North Roxbury, and Nick, it was astounding. It would make anyone who loves architecture and design pull their hair out. It would make them go crazy. Here's the setup. The house was built in Beverly Hills, 1930s, 40s, around there. It was on a registry of Beverly Hills of significant, they tied it to architects. Instead of necessarily being tied to a style or a property itself, they would tie the building of the property to an architect. And this particular home was on the registry of listed of protected architecture. And it came up for sale. The home was purchased. It was on 2 acres on Roxbury. It was purchased for, I want to say it was $49 million is what it was purchased for. It was the CEO of a company called StubHub. And it was this very public spat. As soon as he bought it, he listed it for demolition. They put in a permit for demolition.
Right.
So basically, they just paid close to $50 million just for the dirt, just for this 2 acre parcel.
Yeah.
It went all the way to the Beverly Hills City Council. And I watched this barrister, a well paid attorney, simply demolish the city of Beverly Hills because the gentleman who designed the house was not an architect. He was a builder in the 40s and 50s in the U.S. That's what they were. They weren't architects at the time. They were builders,
Yeah.
and just watching this happen. I mean, Lucille Ball lived next door on one side. Benny. I'm forgetting the name of the other guy who had a talk show. Esther Williams swam in the swimming pool. It was in Lux magazine. It was in AD. It was an interesting property. And you know what? It's been demolished. And I just thought it was interesting. 15 minutes is all it took this one attorney. And I bring that up because I think it's interesting and I think it's great that you have regulations, but at the same time, you have not just because something's old doesn't make it worthy of restoration. And I bring that up because I wanted to ask you about your approach, not necessarily to the restoration of style, because I think that's fairly straightforward. But when you get into things like sustainable building, new materials, composites, man-mades, some new materials that actually make things easier and better to build with. They last longer, especially in light of how climate is changing around us, the way that people are living longer and different style of life. And look at the light bulb, for example. You know, you go back to the incandescent. Then the incandescent was traded out for the CFL, that horrible corkscrew CFL. I don't know if you had them there, but we had them here. And then CFLs got a little bit better. And then you went to that glaring like the sun halogen. And then halogen gave way to a hard white LED. And now what LED bulbs are capable of doing for a lighting plan is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And those are bulbs. Those are things you can change, but power sources, photovoltaics. So how do you keep up with restoring historically relevant properties, staying true and obviously following code, and still being able to experiment and advance because the industry requires it?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. One of the biggest challenges in the space that I work at the moment is the fact that we've got the climate agenda around us, and we're all fully aware of the needs of that. But we've got in this country, you've got historic England, who's set an agenda at the moment which still says you cannot remove historic fabric or change the character of a listed building without consent. So I've been published in the Times newspaper, for instance, talking about double glazing. Conservation officers are just starting to begin to accept that one might be able to swap original Georgian sash windows for like timber profiles, but with slim light double glazed glazing panes in. Now, if I went into Bath and had a conversation with a conservation officer tomorrow about a project and just said we want to change the windows for that, they would just say no, you can't. So that's what you're up against. Starts there. If you had a new section on the back of a property, or you're making some adaptations to the back or the front, and you're making some changes to it, then the likelihood is they would let you put some better performing glazing into like for like designed window sashes. So a lot of Georgian property, talking about Bath, for instance, very Georgian by nature. So the windows are sash style windows. But the trouble is, and the conservation officer had a point, of course. If you've got an amazing terrace or something like the Circle in Bath, very very famous facade, where all the buildings relate to each other. You let one person change their glass to double glazed units, it's going to look out of place with the rest of the terrace. But if you've got a property that's, up the road, slightly out of the sticks, detached, then I think the change is slightly welcome slightly more, but it is a challenge. Currently, the agenda is no, because original glazed Georgian windows are part of the historic fabric. It's as simple as that. So what? So no, you can't remove that historic fabric.
So
You can't change it.
exteriors you can't touch in
It's
many
very
cases.
difficult. You can't put heat pumps. If you've got a Georgian facade in the middle of Bath, a terraced facade, where are you going to put a heat pump? And the heat pump's not really going to work on a property like that anyway. It's going to be like trying to keep your food cool in the fridge with the fridge in the refrigerator with the refrigerator door left open. It's going to work, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to use a lot more energy. So Georgian terraces in places like Bath are hard to deal with. I think they'll get there. So where one's being encouraged to make a difference is by insulation. So you can insulate lofts. Obviously, two sides are insulated anyway because they're a terrace. You've got front and back. Um, More sophisticated heating and heating controls, more sophisticated lighting. But all of that is a little bit on the edge in terms of, well, okay, where are you going to put the lighting? Where are you going to make holes in the original lath and plaster ceilings? It's very, very different. You're building a brand new property, it's encouraged. You can go mad. Really, really, that's hugely supported.
So hypothetically, you've got a Bethonian client and they understand because it's made very clear. It's like it doesn't matter how much money you have, how wealthy you are, what kind of celebrity you are. These are the rules. You can't circumvent them.
Yeah.
But what about the interiors of it? Is that where your opportunity is?
Potentially in some spaces, but often the interior. So the outside, yes, it's ornate and it's listed, but internally there'll be all sorts of joinery and fine detailing and cornicing and details that just can't be destroyed. So what you can do is demonstrate you're preserving an historic finish. So let's just say you've got an external wall with a window in it that has all sorts of fine joinery, dado rails, skirting, beautiful cornicing. And there's nothing stopping you adding some insulation to that internal wall. If you do it the right way, obviously you're going to hide or rather conceal those beautiful original features. But you can do that, and then you can recreate those features on the other on the new wall you're creating. And then behind that, obviously, you will have preserved the original fabric. As long as you're not causing any damage to the original fabric, then that's fine. But you're going to be taking 150 millimeters off your internal floor area by adding insulation by the time it's battened off the wall. So it's complex and it doesn't tend to happen very often. And at the moment, that's just the way it is. So then
So
we look at introducing other energy. So certainly, if we can preserve energy by minimizing use of electricity. So yes, lighting is an obvious one. Controls on lighting, controls on heating, use of heating, the extent by which heating is used, the heating source, whether it's gas. I mean, so many houses in this country are served still by oil. It's all rather prehistoric in places, but you can get a much more sophisticated boiler these days or heat source with some, energy efficient energy efficient controls, which make it much more efficient to use. You're never going to match a new built, fully insulated, high performing building.
one of your projects that I wanted to dive into a little bit when I was looking at a number of them, it seemed like it matches up to what you're talking about as far as kind of looking for opportunity. The Bloomfield House.
Yes. Yeah,
So, so it's allegedly, reputedly designed by Thomas Baldwin in the 1790s.
that's right. And it was lived in by the Lord Mayor and Lady Mayoress of Bath.
Okay.
So it was very grand. They lived at the top of a hill, looking down at the beautiful historic city, and it's stunning.
Grade two listed. What does that mean?
So that's the first level of listing. So it's been listed. It's recognised to have features that are historic and would be recognised by historic England as needing to be preserved, but it's not of special interest. It's not grade two star. It's not grade one. It's not grade one star.
Okay, so that creates more opportunity. So the
A little bit more
exteriors,
opportunity. Yeah, a little bit more opportunity.
the exterior is gorgeous. It's really really interesting architecture. What did you do to the exterior of this project?
Well, one of the most interesting things we did to the exterior of that project. So I can't remember what year, but back in I think 17, 1800, the government in the UK introduced tax laws where properties were taxed based on the number of windows they had. Okay, so like any tax in any country, developers, homeowners go about finding ways to reduce the tax. So what they did was block up their windows. So if you look at there's an elevation on our website. I can't remember much on it. There's four windows that have been blocked up to save tax at the time, but they've been repainted. They've been painted on to look like windows. Okay, yeah, and that's where the term daylight robbery came from. The term daylight robbery came from the taxes that were introduced, which caused people to block up their windows. It was daylight robbery. Of course, over time, developers and house builders started building houses with less windows. So in time, the government reversed it. But when it was introduced, all people could do was block up their windows. So that
So
house it's a beautiful house. So the external fabric in Bath, the conservation team are very sensitive to people cleaning the stonework. That was a big issue for us there. So they don't like it when you clean the stonework right back to really clean like new. They want it cleaned, partially cleaned, so the property still doesn't look like a brand new glowing.
so wait a minute. So this looks like a limestone. Is this limestone?
It's a Bath stone.
Bathstone, of course. So when it comes to that, are you limited by the level of patina? How much patina can you leave, or how much can you remove? How do you know?
Yeah, yeah, so you're allowed to clean it. My client wanted his property cleaned and all the stone repaired and mended, which we did. We repaired all of the stonework on the outside envelope of that property. But when it came, so we had to seek consent to do that. But and we also seek consent to clean the property. But the conservation officer wanted to see the building being cleaned, so that we didn't clean it too much, so that it still showed signs of patina. So that's being cleaned, but it's not been cleaned right back. We did effectively a bad job of cleaning it to satisfy the needs of the conservation officer. But our client accepted it. So those windows, bizarrely, all those windows in that property are single glazed. I mean, it's just crazy. And I think in due course, perhaps sooner rather than later, but in due course, I think Historic England will modify the agenda to say that, okay, provided windows look identical, i.e. the joinery looks identical and the sash windows look identical, the glass can be double glazed. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy that we can't do that at the moment.
That's wild. Okay, so as we walk through this, and help me put everything in the plate. I can't put the puzzle together, so help me put the puzzle together as far as where rooms are and where they're located and how. But there's a couple of things that you did that I thought were so interesting. That the guest house in back is modern. It's so you don't have so a new build on the same property. You don't have the same restrictions. You can do what you want with that.
Yeah. So if you've got an historic listed property, don't forget anyone who owns that property is effectively a custodian of that property, right? So, my client who bought that property has a right to make an application and say, can I do this to it? Can I do that to it? I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that. Now, you put yourself in quite a strong position with the conservation officer if the building's already in quite a bad state of disrepair. And back in the 70s, 80s, a lot of things, through planning, a lot of things were allowed to happen to buildings that perhaps shouldn't have been. So on reflection, they were bad decisions. So when my client purchased that property, there was some quite inappropriate pieces of architecture added to it, sections that had been modified to it. So we were able to have quite a good conversation with the conservation officer to negotiate, to say, well, look, if we remove these awful additions that have been put on in the 70s and these parts and sections that really are not in keeping with the character of the building, then will you allow us to do this? Will you allow us to do that? Because if you don't allow us to remove those bits, we won't bother retaining the other bits. So the conservation officer is thinking, well, okay, yeah, you're the custodian, but I've got a responsibility to look after the public interest and ensure that that building is preserved appropriately. So the conservation officer is thinking, well, ought I give permission for that to happen? So they need to balance up. Okay, well, if you're going to remove those inappropriate additions and modifications that have been made to the building, that outweighs the other changes you're asking to make. So therefore, that gives me good reason to allow you consent to do the things you want to do. And then, for instance, there's a modern structure in the garden. Well, that can be removed. That's how the conservation officer, that is not having a detrimental effect to that historic building. It's been put there. It can easily be taken away. One of the most important things with conservation, particularly in a city like Bath, heritage city, is quality. Most of the buildings in Bath were built to the highest quality. People wouldn't dream of building property. They couldn't afford to build buildings to the standard with all the ornate stonework to the front facades and all the detailing. It would just be too much money. So if someone wants to make some changes to their property or they want to add an addition to the side, more often than not, if you can demonstrate that you're going to do it in keeping with the quality that would have been apparent when the property was built, then that's more likely to be supported. So they really don't like cheap and nasty additions being connected to beautifully built Georgian properties.
Well, something you said earlier struck with me. That is that the 70s and 80s were not good, and it seems to be one of those. The more I dig into it, the more I realize that the 70s and 80s were internationally a bad era for design and architecture. It just seems universal.
I think. Well, I don't remember anything particularly good coming out of the 80s. I think in the 70s there was sort of mid-century modern architecture, which has become really cool now. We're doing a property for someone at the moment where they've employed a really cool architect who focuses on mid-century modernist sort of design, and that's very 70s, very 70s.
It's funny that you say that because maybe it was 70s there, but it was 50s in the States. So you'll have a community like Palm Springs, which was rediscovered for all of these incredible mid-century modern properties that were all kind of, many were brought back to the way they were supposed to be, many were brought back to a different variation, but it's interesting. Yeah.
I say 70s, it probably is from sort of early 60s through to sort of mid-late 70s.
Yeah.
But going back to Bloomfield House, it is a beautiful property. It sounds very proud. It's been restored. All of the outside's been restored. So one is permitted to undertake essential maintenance, repair and maintenance to a listed property on a like-for-like basis without consent. So supposing you've got property's age, right, and fall into states of disrepair. So supposing you have a roof that's become rather dilapidated and letting in water, provided that you repair the roof in the same way as it's been built, then you're entitled to undertake that work without asking for consent.
But even in that example, even if you've got a flat roof, which is traditionally a terrible way for a roof to be built for drainage, especially if it's not going to be cared for meticulously, you're allowed to just build it back the same way, but you can't adjust for different technique.
Well, people do, of
Oh, they
course.
do. Okay.
People do. There's a bit of a game, and I shouldn't say this, but of course, the conservation officer is going to encourage people and absolutely encourage people to repair the property in the same form that it was originally constructed. But I think if sections are completely out of sight, and it makes complete sense to use a more modern material, then that could usually be negotiated. But you take a building like Bloomfield House, that's got a slate pitched roof, and around the edge of it is there's a stone parapet, and those stone parapets are lead lined. So we have relined them with new lead. Um,
And
and
what's
that's a great product and great and it looks beautiful and it's done well. But I mean, one could say, well, you could use a GRP plastic or something like that. Of course you could, but you wouldn't be allowed to. You just wouldn't get away with it.
And I'm looking at a number of different rooms, one bathroom in particular with the white marble, and I'm noticing some interesting niche work. And I'm wondering, in a space like that, do you have to build up from the wall to put in new plumbing? Or, because it doesn't seem like you'd be able to go into the wall to change the plumbing. So do you have to build out for that?
Yeah, those walls are stone walls. They're big, thick stone walls. I mean, I'm not talking about partition in the middle, but the exterior walls. So if you're going to introduce modern shower, for instance, and install marble tiles in the same form that we've installed at Bloomfield House, for a start, if you're going to introduce large marble or any type of bathroom tile, one usually likes to work with a square and room, and it's seldom would you find a property like that in Bath that is perfectly square. So you need to build the walls out a little bit to make it square to start with, so that a square shower tray can fit in the corner of the room. Otherwise, you get in all sorts of trouble. So we do find ourselves building out off the wall, studding off the wall slightly, creating the space that the bathroom can be built in. And from a conservation point of view, it's about, okay, we've been given consent for a bathroom to go into that space. So now we can build a bathroom without destroying the original fabric. So building in and creating that bathroom would be welcomed, because then you're not doing anything detrimental to the original fabric.
And I suppose there's two ways of looking at this. The first way is, well, you're losing a great deal of square footage,
Yeah.
but the homes are so vast and they're so big that it doesn't really, except are the rooms big enough to accommodate that? And I guess that's the one space that I find most interesting, and I'm curious how you address this in looking at the kitchen.
Yeah.
Because kitchens have changed so dramatically just since the pandemic, and I'm curious if you're seeing it the same way. When I was growing up in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, California, when my parents remodeled our house and they redid the kitchen, the whole conversation was about where the three appliances would go and on how the triangle of those three appliances would work. That's back in the 70s. So a modern contemporary kitchen does not operate on three appliances on a triangle anymore, because the nature of kitchen has changed, as evidenced by the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic was one of these global revolutions in residential architecture, because in many cases you'll have refrigeration drawers, warming drawers. There's a whole new suite of appliances. What's being done with coffee machines and ice makers now is extraordinary, but it just means that there's a greater draw of power to the kitchen. There's a greater use case scenario for each kitchen. How do you address that? And I would imagine, I'm talking myself through this, but I imagine that most of these homes already have a butler's pantry and or a scullery or some other secondary kitchen. How do you approach the kitchen space in these homes?
Well, first of all, you take a building like Bloomfield House. Of course, that property would have had servants' quarters, and all the kitchen space and cooking would have been down in the basement. Okay, so for a start, the original cooking and kitchen and cleaning and washing type space would have all been out of sight down in the basement. One staircase for servants to use to get up and down the building, one main staircase for the homeowners to live in. So just going back to your point about bathrooms as well, there wouldn't have been bathrooms. Yeah. So the rooms on the upper floors are big square rooms. So it really suits to make some really nice big spaces that can cater as big bathroom stroke dressing spaces. So they're quite easy to work with in that respect, as long as the conservation officer will allow you to put a bathroom where you want to put a bathroom. People want en suites these days. But just going back to the kitchen. So the first challenge is, okay, so these rooms on the ground floor where people want their social kitchen space now didn't used to be kitchens. Okay, so we're changing the character of this building. Please, Mr. Conservation Officer, can we put a kitchen in one of these rooms that would have been a grander reception room? Okay, so because it's grade two listed, it's harder with a higher listing. The grade two listed, again, as long as you're sort of working on the basis of, well, we're the current custodians and we're going to put something that has kitchen features in it to allow that room to operate as a kitchen rather than turn that space into a kitchen. So what tends to happen these days, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, is, of course, as I've just alluded to years ago, kitchens were spaces that servants just cooked in all day. But these days, kitchens are very social spaces. So people really want a space that can operate to heat and be very functional as a cooking and eating space, but probably have a secondary space that can be where all the old fondue sets and all the stuff you don't use very often can be stored. So what we find these days is clients they want a space that can be, more utility type room that can have a lot of storage in it to support the kitchen. But the actual kitchen itself is a very functional, social, modern looking space, which will probably have an island in it, probably have some task orientated space in it, and then the rest of it is very much open to thoroughfare, sitting, socializing, and the like. And as you rightly alluded to, all these coffee machines and warmers and wine coolers and the like are all pretty cool. People want them because they look cool and they're great things to have in your social kitchen. But you certainly don't. Most of our clients certainly don't want cupboards full of rubbish they got given for a wedding present 40 years ago. I mean, that's either down in the basement or in some supplementary space.
If you could take any of the building practices that were utilized back in the 1700s, 1800s, that speak to a betterment of design build, what would some of those things be? And I'll give you an example of, in the US, like we talked about, the 1970s, 1980s were not good years for design and architecture and the built environment. Homes were built, the lumber sizes changed, the density of lumber changed, the way homes were built. It was much faster. Personally, I would never buy a home. If I'm buying a home in the U.S., I would never buy one that was built in the 1970s or 80s. I just wouldn't. But I'm curious, building practices in the 1790s, early 1800s, what did they get right that maybe we don't do anymore?
Josh, they got so much right. They got so much right. And I walk into buildings these days that are built in those periods, and I see them not being operated how they were designed to operate. So people are saying, I'm getting too hot. We need some ventilation in here. Or, we've got damp coming through the wall, etc., etc., etc. The reason is that people don't understand how the buildings were designed. So back in that period, people built buildings with big, thick, heavy stone walls, which is fantastic for managing thermal performance of a building. So in the summer, when it gets too hot and you've got that massive thermal structure that can absorb heat from the space through the course of the day, And then if you leave the windows slightly open at night, it can cool down overnight so that it's ready to absorb all that heat again the next day. And they've got really tall ceilings, so the dirty, warm air can sit at high level. And often they had means of ventilating the air out through the roof space, through opening roof lights with vents at low level so that the air could be controlled through these spaces. Go into any church or cathedral, this is how they designed to operate. But over years, people have ignored maintaining those design features. So the roof light doesn't open anymore because it's too expensive to get up there to fix it, or it's so delicate it couldn't be repaired. So all of a sudden, that air movement that was designed to take effect when the space became overheated no longer works. So the heat starts building down and it all becomes stuffy and uncomfortable. So there's an awful lot that was done incredibly well. They were great designers in those days, and they really worked out how to use a building's thermal performance to improve comfort and how airflow moved and how the building could absorb heat, both or absorb moisture and dampness from outside and then expel it. You don't get that these days. Houses are built, but everything's very mean and thin. So a modern house these days will overheat very quickly, and there's no means of dispelling that heat. So we sort of like, well, let's fit an air conditioning unit to sort of cool that heat down. Well, there was no need to do that. Absolutely no need to do that. So that's what I really miss.
Is Bathstone still quarried?
Yes. Yeah.
And is it still used for residential exteriors, or is it
Yeah,
it is
cladding. It's a cladding. So
it's a cladding. Okay.
The houses tended to be built with rubble stone. So they built them with rubble stone and all sorts of bits of timber and stuff to make the walls. The Georgians were only interested in the front facades. If you go into Bath and walk around the back of the houses, they are an absolute state. But the front is just beautiful. And then you go inside and go, why have we got a window there? And it was all about what the facade looked like. So it's a Bath stone cladding that's stuck on the outside. They were just totally focused in symmetry and beautiful terraces. They didn't care what happened at the back. All the soil pipes and misshaped windows and everything are just plonked on the back without any bathroom in most instances. But I do. But you touch on a really really good point there, and it's about because I often use it. So when we talked when we first started having this conversation about how one can introduce sustainable and climate agenda type features to historic properties, but don't forget those historic properties they've been there 200 years. So we're not using the carbon to build them again. We're not demolishing them. So you start from a really good environmental point. So yes, the windows might be single glazed and you might be leaking energy, but it doesn't compare. There's no comparison to the energy saved from taking on an existing building that's 200 years old to building a brand new one from scratch with concrete and materials that need to be, the carbon footprint, I think, is half of an historic building to a modern building.
So nowadays, the challenge for you with the cost of everything, tariffs aside, supply chain aside, just the fact that the cost of everything has gone up substantially post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Desire has increased. I don't know if you're suffering a housing shortage the way that we are, but it's massive.
Yeah, same here. Huge.
So as you think about moving forward smartly and doing what you do and remodeling, refurbishing, and building new,
yeah.
What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the ways that you're applying what you've learned over the last 5, 6, 16, 26 years in your career that you're utilizing now to accomplish that time, cost, and quality issue?
Yeah, cost is a big issue. Cost is a big issue, and I look at some of the work we did 5, 6 years ago for people, which is probably half as much as it would cost them today. And that's not much. That normally you say, well, we did this 20 years ago and it was half the price, but now you're talking about 5 years ago, it was half the price. So that shows how quickly prices have gone up. Um, so it's so I think one of the challenges we have, and I'll get to your point. One of the challenges we find in our business these days, because people are moving far more frequently than they used to. People used to buy a house and well, we'll be here 30 years. So if we spend a bit more than we should have on the property, it's in 30 years' time, it's going to be, worth much more. But nowadays, people say, well, hold on, if I buy this house for say £3 million and I spend 1 million on it, is it going to be worth four when I finished it? And of course, the answer will, in 10, 20 years' time, of course it probably is. But, if you have to move in the next year, can't really guarantee it. And of course, people are then becoming nervous. They say, well, actually, I'd rather only spend 500. So one of the things we've become very focused on is providing very robust cost information to clients to enable them to make informed decisions very early on in the process. That you could be a little bit loose around that years ago, but nowadays I think people are they need to make much more informed decisions prior to purchase, and they need that robust information. So we capture a lot of cost data on all the projects we do. So if someone's talking to me about a listed property in Bath, 5,000 square feet, 6-story, I've probably got 40 that we've done that are almost identical. So we've got some really good data. So I think having really good cost information is important. That's probably the biggest driver at the moment, cost. People are scared of there's so many programs on TV, and we've all heard horror stories of construction projects going over budget, by ridiculous amounts, and then people, marriages breaking up and all these sort of things. So robust information at the outset, I think, is critical. I find myself, our business is slightly different to standard businesses. I've set it up purposely to be very different. I find myself going to meet people in the first instance and just being very honest and open and saying what I would do if it was my house, and giving them real, honest budget information. And more often than not, they appreciate that. They might not like what they hear, but they appreciate it. And I think they appreciate the honesty. And if we have to walk away from a project because they don't want to go forward with it, or they've been told by someone else it's going to be less, then I'd rather it that way. So budget and robust information from a cost point of view, I think is really important. The question was more about, what are my takeaways? It's a good question. I don't really know off the top of my head what my takeaways are, because I've adapted. I started as an engineer in large commercial developments, and now I did high-rise buildings. I've done some work in New York. I brought some New York information back to the UK. We did a lot of high-rise building. I did a lot of apartments. And now, my business is about moving up the value ladder. One thing's for certain in this country and all over the world, people are feeling the pressure of the economic drivers forced upon them. And the more wealth you have as an individual when you're buying a property, and the easier those sort of people become my client, and the easier they are to work with. If I've got a client who wants to spend £200,000 on their property, £200,000 doesn't go very far. If I've got a client who's going to spend 2 million, then I can work much easier with those clients. So we look at the larger, higher end properties. So that's one of the things as a takeaway as well. We're better off working on larger, more sophisticated, more luxurious properties than more smaller, less expensive properties.
Last question I have for you is just pure curiosity. Where do you go to find new resources, new products, new material? I have found that there is such a steepening of the learning curve now, because so many new products are available globally. New appliances, new HVAC, new materials, just so much new. The advancement of the materiality and the technology that goes into, some of the home theater spaces that I'm sure you must work with as well, what they're doing with integration and home technology. Where do you go to find new projects? Do you travel extensively, or is it basically what's available there?
No, we don't travel extensively. We're mindful of a lot of what's going on, but we clients tend to appoint us as their trusted advisor to help deliver their project on their behalf. So they know that we're not the architect, or we're the IT designer, or the building services designer, but we're connected to leading businesses that work in that space. So our supply chain includes those leading businesses. So if I'm looking to if I've got a client who wants some real sort of state of the art uh, cinema room, let's just say complex in their house, then we've got members of our supply chain who are absolute industry leaders in that space, who we would bring to the table, and we rely on them to keep ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Be a front of technology, because you can't. It's impossible for one person or one business to be ahead of everything. So we rely on conversations with them and bringing those parties to the table who are abreast of what's going
Makes
on.
sense to me. Nick, I cannot believe how fast an hour flies by. This was fantastic. I greatly appreciate your time. This was fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Josh. I'd love to do it again. I feel like there's so much we haven't discussed.
I feel the same way. No, we're definitely going to have to do this again soon,
And
hopefully.
it wasn't rehearsed, so I mean, I feel I hope I've answered your questions as well as I could have. I'm sure if I'd answered them again, I might answer them slightly differently. But it's been very thought-provoking, and feels like you've asked some good questions. So I hope I've answered them well enough for you.
No, absolutely. This was fantastic, and I really appreciate it. Nick, thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts and your stories. I loved it, really did. Thank you to my incredible partner sponsors, Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, TimberTech, the Best Buy Company, James Hardy, and Shelter Republic for your sponsorship of Convo by Design, which allows me to seek out sublime design stories from beyond the work itself and showcase unique personalities, chasing new ideas and changing the way we think about design and architecture, and present it to you. So please give them an opportunity on your next project. And you heard me mention Shelter Republic. If you are a designer, architect, maker, you're in the industry, Shelter Republic is a community, and you are more than welcome. It's free to join, but you have to have an invitation. One of the many things you can email me about, convobydesign@outlook.com, or message me on Instagram, Convo by Design with an X. Along with that, please make sure you are sending your suggestions for guests and for locations where you'd like to see the show record live. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, be well, stay focused and driven so you can rise above the chaos, which is hitting terminal velocity. Kidding, not kidding.